Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about something that's super relevant to a lot of you, I'm sure, access to fertility treatments and this bill everyone's been talking about, the Right to IVF Act.
Yeah, it's really interesting actually how this act, it's officially S.4445, by the way, how it goes way beyond just IVF.
Okay.
It's like they're trying to tackle this whole family building thing from all these different angles,
Yeah.
like legal stuff, medical stuff, even financial stuff.
Wow. Okay, so let's unpack all that, starting right off the bat with the name Right to IVF Act. I mean, that's got to be intentional, right? It sounds kind of powerful. Like it's not just about more choices, but like a guarantee or something.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's definitely deliberate. What they're trying to do is make access to fertility treatment like a right written into law.
Mhm.
So it's like no matter what state laws say or anything like that, this act would kind of override those and say
Wow.
everyone has this right. So it's definitely not just about having the option. It's about making sure people can actually get these treatments if they need them.
Okay, so it's like a federal guarantee.
Exactly.
Got it. And I was looking at the actual text of the bill on congress.gov, and it's a lot to take in, but wow, it really does cover a lot. Like everything from IVF to egg freezing, even artificial insemination.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a whole section on fertility preservation for veterans, like before they're deployed. So yeah, this goes way beyond just IVF, huh?
Oh, yeah, totally. And it gets even more interesting, actually. There's this whole part in there about making sure people going through cancer treatment can preserve their fertility too.
Really?
Yeah. It's like they realize that family planning isn't just for people actively trying to have kids right now, but also for those who might want to in the future, but need treatment that could impact that. It's actually a really thoughtful way to look at the whole issue.
Wow, I did not realize it went that far. They really did think of everything. Even like I thought something about using telemedicine for fertility treatment. Is that something people actually do?
It's becoming more and more common, actually. And the fact that they included it in this bill, I think it tells us a couple of things. Like, first, it shows they're being forward thinking about healthcare access in general, especially for folks out in rural areas who might not have specialists nearby.
Oh, that makes sense.
And then second, it shows they get that going through fertility treatment can be this whole big thing logistically, juggling appointments and work and everything else.
Yeah.
So this telemedicine thing, it's like they're trying to make that part a little easier on people.
That's true. It's a lot to handle on top of everything else. So it sounds like they're not just focused on the medical aspect of it all, but like the emotional and logistical hurdles people face too.
Totally. Yeah, for sure. For sure. It really does show you they're trying to make this whole thing more inclusive,
Hmm.
you know, like really thinking about how to help people get access to these treatments no matter what.
Which kind of makes you wonder, like, who's actually behind this whole thing? It must take some serious support to get a bill this, like, comprehensive, off the ground.
Well, that's where it gets interesting. So there's 48 senators listed as co-sponsors on congress.gov.
Wow, 48.
Yeah. So that's a lot of support, right?
Yeah.
But when you look closer, there's definitely a pattern there.
Yeah, I was actually just going to say, glancing through that list earlier, it's pretty clear almost all Democrats.
Yep, you got it.
Yeah.
All but two of them are Democrats, actually.
Hmm.
Plus the two independents in the Senate, they're on board too.
Okay.
So that kind of tells us this is a pretty partisan bill, which could explain why it's hitting some roadblocks.
Right, because even if it sounds amazing in theory, if it gets labeled as a Democrat thing, it's automatically going to be an uphill battle.
Exactly. And it's not just about those party lines either. Senator Duckworth, the one who introduced this whole bill,
Hmm.
she's a veteran herself.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah, so she's not just talking about this stuff in theory. She gets it.
Mm.
She's seen how serving can affect your family plans.
Especially with all those parts of the bill about veterans' reproductive health, that must mean a lot.
Oh, absolutely. It gives her words a lot more weight, I think.
Right.
Like, this isn't just legal jargon, it's real life stuff.
Totally. Okay, so we've got this ambitious act, a pretty clear partisan divide, and then Senator Duckworth's personal stake in it all. But you look on congress.gov, it seems like the bill itself is kind of stuck.
Yeah, you're not wrong. It was introduced back in June, and sure, people are talking about it, but it hasn't really gone anywhere yet.
Mm.
Right now, it's on the Senate's legislative calendar, which basically means they're waiting for their turn to actually, debate it and vote on it.
Which leads us to that September 17th vote. Everyone was watching that one.
Yeah, that was a big moment for the Right to IVF Act, for sure. It was close, but in the end, they rejected cloture.
Okay, hold up. For those of us who don't speak fluent Congress, what does that even mean? What is cloture?
Oh, good point. So basically, cloture is this thing in the Senate where they can, force a vote.
Hmm.
like to stop people from talking about it forever and just make a decision. But to do that, they need what's called a supermajority. It's like more than just a regular majority.
So it's like a way to get around people trying to stall and actually make them vote on it, right?
Exactly. And in this case, the Right to IVF Act, it needed that supermajority to get past all the people against it.
Did they? Did they get that supermajority? I gotta know.
It was really close, but not quite. The final vote was 51 to 44.
So it got a majority, but not enough to actually pass.
Exactly. See, it needed a three-fifths majority to pass, and it just didn't get there.
Wow. So even with most people voting yes, it still wasn't enough.
Yeah, that's how cloture works. And what's interesting is it wasn't like a completely partisan split either.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like Senator Collins from Maine and Senator Murkowski from Alaska, they're both Republicans, but they voted yes.
Wow. Okay. So even with some people crossing the aisle, it still wasn't enough. That really shows you how hard it is to get something like this passed, even if some people think it should be a no-brainer.
It really does.
Yeah,
This whole thing just highlights how complicated lawmaking can be, especially with these kinds of issues. It's like this vote is just a small part of this much bigger conversation happening all over the country about reproductive rights and all that.
definitely. It makes you think about everything that goes into these decisions, like the politics and people's personal beliefs and what society thinks is okay. It's not as easy as just saying everyone should be able to have kids if they want, right? Even when the bill itself tries to take all that into account.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this whole deep dive so fascinating, I think. Because the Right to IVF Act, whether you agree with it or not, it makes you really think about these big questions, like what should the government be in charge of when it comes to healthcare? And what about like individual rights versus what society says? And when we're talking about families, where do you even draw the line? There's no easy answers.
No, definitely not. And for our listeners out there, especially if you're following this whole thing closely, or even if you're personally affected by it, it's definitely something to keep an eye on. Because even though the Right to IVF Act is kind of in limbo right now, the conversation isn't going away anytime soon.
That's for sure. This issue is going to keep coming up, and it'll be interesting to see like how people's opinions change or if the politicians change their minds, all that in the months and years to come.
Makes you wonder, what would it take for a bill like this to actually succeed? Like, how do you bridge that gap between everyone and get people to agree on something so complicated? Something to think about, that's for sure. Something to think about after this deep dive.
Definitely something to think about. It's a conversation worth having.
I couldn't agree more. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We'll be back next time with another fascinating topic.